Aloha, and thank you for joining us. I'm State Senator Sam Slom. The name of the program is A Better Day. And for the next half hour, we hope we can bring you some information, education, and tips to help you, and particularly to follow this year's state legislative session. We're going to have a very special guest on in just a few moments, and we're going to be talking particularly about education and various aspects of education as it revolves around the state building here. But I want to tell you, here we are in February. The legislature began on January 15th. It was a low-key opening this year. Not all the pomp and circumstances usually afforded and associated with our state legislative session. And we're going to be here. It's a 60 working day session like every year, which goes to actually May 1st. So during the period of time, we're going to bring you up-to-date information. If you need information, you can call my office directly, talk to any of my staff, drop in and see us. Hey, you're paying for all of this, so you might as well get down here. And you should come to legislative hearings or to floor sessions in the Senate or the House. Sit up in the gallery. Find out what's going on. Find out what your senators or representatives are saying about bills that may be of specific interest to you. And by all means, participate in the process by sending in testimony or coming to hearings personally. If you need help with that, we'll be glad to do that. By the way, you know, we're starting another year, and a lot of people always ask, why is this program called A Better Day? Especially since the governor has as his political mantra, a new day. Well, we figure that the people in Hawaii, particularly you taxpayers and parents and small business owners, you deserve a better day. We get a little tired of just talking about survival in our state. We want to talk about prosperity, and so that's what this is all about. And while we bring up problems and we talk about things that need to be corrected, we are bullish on Hawaii. We are bullish on the people and the opportunities that we have here. So we're positive, and we want you to know that. Well, the legislative session is going to be dealing, at least initially, with a lot of things that probably won't be around at the end of the session, but they get a lot of early publicity. And I'm talking specifically about now that same-sex marriage was legalized back in the end of 2013 in our special session. There's a big push to legalize marijuana, a big push again annually for gambling, whether we're talking about casino gambling or lotteries or different kinds of gambling as a revenue source for the state. And, oh yes, back again, physician-assisted suicide. But underpinning all of this are the financial statistics of the state. Do we have enough money to pay for all the things that we want to do? Have we done a good enough job of prioritizing what we want to do? If you had an opportunity to say, what are the most important issues and how should they be addressed, are you being listened to down at the state? One of the things that came out of the special session in late 2013, when we had thousands of people down here at the Capitol, they found out, what did they chant? They said, let the people vote, let the people be heard. And they found out that in many cases, the public in Hawaii is not heard because what we do at the legislature determines. And you do not have the right of initiative, referendum, recall, or even term limits in the state. We're the only state that doesn't have any one of those provisions, at least statewide. Well, I've introduced legislation again this year to try to provide these citizen inputs and to give you a voice. But if you don't get involved, if you don't help legislators that are trying to help you and make it more transparent, believe me, it's not going to get done. So call me at the end of the program, email me, stop in, talk about how you can get involved. Main thing is don't get discouraged. Don't give up, because you can make a difference. If you drop out, if you opt not to be involved, then that's a self-fulfilling prophecy and nothing happens. One more thing I wanted to touch on before we get to our guest, and that is the untimely and sudden death of Lowell Kalapa at the end of 2013. By all accounts, Lowell had been in good health, and his death was sudden, and it was a shock. I had the privilege of knowing Lowell Kalapa, the president of the Tax Foundation of Hawaii, for more than 40 years. I had previously worked at the Tax Foundation before he succeeded me. Lowell was without a doubt the #1 fiscal watchdog in this state. He was the man that you could always count on for accurate information, a man of integrity, a man who could take the most difficult fiscal and economic concepts and explain them in such a way that you knew how they impacted you. He was really valuable at the legislature and in the community. He was a community leader, and he was involved in a lot of different things. A lot of people don't know that his passion was affordable housing, and he worked quietly on that as well. But he was known as the fiscal watchdog, the fiscal conscience of the state legislature. And we're going to miss him dearly. And really, quite frankly, I don't know if we're going to find somebody of his caliber and somebody that is able to do all the things that he did for such a long period of time. He was the go-to guy if you had a tax question or a fiscal question or something that had to do with what the intended or unintended consequences were. Lowell Kalapa was the guy that you went to, and he never disappointed. And he had weekly columns. He was on the radio and television and at public hearings and meetings all the time. He was much in demand. He died at the age of 64. It is a tremendous loss for our community, and we thank God for sharing him with us as long as he did. So, Lowell Kalapa, rest in peace. Maybe he's doing fiscal analysis now for God up above. We hope so. Well, I told you we have a special guest today, and I'd like to introduce her. I'm very fortunate. I met her a year or so ago, and she's on my staff during this 2014 legislative session, but she's got a tremendous background in education. She was a teacher for more than 10 years at Farrington, part of the DOE. She's an educational consultant. She's very knowledgeable, and since there are a lot of educational issues, I thought this would be a good time to talk to Kimberly. And so I'd like to introduce Kimberly Kepner Sybounmy. Did I get that right?
You got it right.
Name? Okay. Well, why don't you, Kim, give us a little brief 101 on a little bit of your background.
Okay. Well, I'm originally from Colorado, and I came out about 24 years ago, and decided to go into education. And I did a little bit of student teaching in a number of the high schools here, and decided secondary school. So I went home to Colorado. I got my teaching certificate there, and I did student teaching in a school very much like Farrington High School. So when I decided to move back, I had already subbed at Farrington and kind of knew what kind of students were there and the environment, and knew that's really where I wanted to be. I wanted to see if I could make a difference. And I loved working there. I loved working with the kids. The students, you know, there's a tough reputation, but most of those kids are terrific.
I don't think there's a lot of teachers that, first of all, want to go into high school. Secondly, that wanted to go to Farrington. But you wanted to, and you said you loved it. You loved your experience.
Yeah, I loved it. The kids are so appreciative. Any extra time you give them, they really grow from whatever attention they receive. So it's a rewarding.
Our Senate President is a proud graduate from Farrington. She always talks up the school. So
yeah.
That's great. And you said that most of the kids were good kids, right? That you didn't. I mean, the picture oftentimes painted is that it's a disruptive school, that most of the students are into other things other than education, but that was not your experience?
No, I mean, I think there's a mix of kids, and it kind of, you have an ebb and flow depending on who's going, you know, who's at school and who leaves school. But for the most part, I found the students I coached and the students that I taught to be genuinely big-hearted, kind-hearted kids that made me love my job. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah. And what did you do right after you left teaching?
So when we decided to start a family, I decided I would go back to school. And so I got my master's in educational psychology and then my doctorate in curriculum studies and teacher education. Mm-hmm. That allows me now to work as an educational consultant. And I work part-time with schools that go into restructuring. My primary focus of my research was in high school career academies. And they're nationally a pretty popular way of reforming schools. Locally, they started out with just a few high schools that had these career academies, and over the last, from the early 90s to now, there are many, and some schools are going completely into career academies.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got the academies. How are they actually doing now?
Well, I think looking at it now, taking a step back, not being a teacher in the classroom, the problem with a lot of school reforms is the ones that work, when they're implemented somewhere else, they often remove some of the most effective parts. Either they can't afford it, they can't get their staff on board, they don't buy into it, so some of the most critical components can be pushed out of the picture. So I would say you probably have some that are very effective.
Mm-hmm.
They have a group of teachers that are cohesive, have a common goal, high expectations. They are set up so that students have experiences in the community and connections to higher education. And then there's some schools that are just not ready for that, or don't plan on doing that because they have too many other things going on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of reasons for it, but the most effective ones are the ones that are fully implemented.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I met you when you were testifying before the Education Committee in the Senate. I was struck by the fact that your testimony was a little bit different and more independent. Usually when people come down, particularly from the DOE or from the teachers union, the HSTA, everybody seems to be in lockstep, and usually it has to do with one simple thing: give us more money, let's have more bureaucracy, let's have more of the state involvement. And your testimony was not along those lines, and yet you're a good person to speak to because you did have that frontline experience and teaching and all that. Look, you know that we spend all of our time down here talking about how important education is, and
Right.
we do things for the keiki and all that. Has that been your experience, though, that we actually deliver on what we say?
Well, I think when I was teaching, I certainly thought that. I gave 110% every day, which made it very fulfilling. But that's not always the case next door or down the line. And I think when I came back in and had a broader perspective, that's when I started to see the inconsistencies and the difficulties of a system where you have terrific people.
Mm-hmm.
I worked alongside some of the best teachers, master teachers. I would want my kid to have some of those great teachers for science or math. I was genuinely impressed with them. But you have a lot of good people in a system that they work against, and many of the requirements take away from them doing their number one job, teaching students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know one of the complaints that I've had over the years is that as the DOE continues to grow, we've got more people outside of the classroom and not really involved in the direct teaching, and that's, would you agree that that's where we need the emphasis?
Yeah, it needs to happen in the classroom. Changes need to focus on the most important relationship, teacher-student. That research bears out is the most critical component to improving education.
Well, let's take a look at some of the so-called education issues that have been bouncing around here for a number of years. First of all, the idea of merit pay or merit evaluation for teachers. The union has not been keen on that in the past. It's rather we would lobby to get increases for everybody. How do you as a teacher feel about that, about merit pay and about evaluations?
Well, I think every job has an evaluation in some form. If it's not won by your boss, it's by your customers. And if they aren't happy with service or a product, they simply don't return. So there's your evaluation. If they're happy, they return and they bring others. In education, yes, it's a field that's difficult to evaluate because there's a lot of variables, but we can't have a clear understanding of what is going to impact student learning unless we do evaluation. I think the teachers should have a say in how it's done, because many of them have great ideas at how to get at the kernels of what makes the greatest impact on student learning.
Yeah.
On the side of merit pay, I feel like we need more carrots, and rewarding people for doing a tremendous job is, in my opinion, a great idea. Teachers might not all be motivated by money. I mean, I'm sure there are some that really aren't. They're just there because they're satisfied with what they're doing.
But the realities are you've got to pay the rent, pay for the food, and all of that as well.
That's right. So if we could show a teacher has a great impact on student learning, and they can be awarded for that, I think you'll have more teachers striving to duplicate what works.
Well, I've always been one of the support incentives and options and choices. You don't have to force anybody to do it, but it is an additional benefit. It's an opportunity for teachers, for the schools, for the community as well. As far as the idea of merit or evaluation, I think, again, I've always been fully supportive, but I think that is just one tool. It shouldn't be the only one. Everybody says, well, how difficult it is, to evaluate. And as you point out, in the private sector, there's evaluations going on all the time. And I know that a lot of people, particularly in government, don't want to look at it, but the students and their parents really are customers.
That's
and
right.
they're clients.
They're clients.
But we don't handle them that way. Why? Because we've got compulsory education. Because we can force the little keiki to sit in a room no matter what goes on there. So it would be incumbent upon all of us to insist on the best possible education and all of that. And that doesn't mean just more money, because oftentimes you can throw money at a bad project or at a bad administrator or educator, and you don't get good results.
True.
Yeah. The big issue last year, and it's come back again because it's one of the governor's principal issues, is so-called early education. And it didn't pass last year, although parts of it passed, but it didn't pass, and the whole idea, it was sold to the public as being a way of providing universal education for 4-year-olds. I was very critical of it. I did not support it. I do not support it now for a couple reasons. Number one, the proponents will tell you honestly and candidly that their goal is not just to take care of 4-year-olds, but to expand this to 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 1-year-old, and have the taxpayers really bear the brunt of the financial obligations, whereas before we had private early education, and some of those providers in early education are saying, well, if the state will pay for it, so much the better. And to me, it comes down to, again, a question not of early education, but of early subsidy. Am I off base on that?
No, I think that's probably the case. When I had my children in preschool, I was so grateful to the people who ran the preschools. And we moved them around to find the right fit. And I always felt like I wished everybody had the opportunity to do that. Well, when I looked around, many of the preschool programs, they are decided on your family income. So you can send your child, there's lots of opportunity to send children to preschool, even if you're low income. And once you start subsidizing a small group, which it sounds good, and that's how it was pitched to me in the beginning, we're just going to work with the lower income families, that made sense to me. Okay, they have very few means, but I think what you mentioned earlier, the look at expanding is right where they're going to go, and our state can't afford it. And I'm still looking at research to determine whether.
And I guess the question is, should the state afford it?
Is it their responsibility?
It always is amusing to me when you ask people about certain things, including early education. They say, oh, it's so expensive. And then you look at some of their choices for where they spend their money. It's not that it's so expensive, it's how they prioritize, and people prioritize. I mean, we talk about people struggling today, and they are, because the economy is difficult here. But they're struggling with several cars, with multiple audio equipment and phones and very expensive contracts.
Plans,
and when you tell people, well, did you ever think of cutting this out or cutting this down? And no, they don't. They want it all. And so from that standpoint, yes, it does become expensive, and they're looking for somebody else to pay for it. And that raises the price for everybody.
For everybody else, yeah.
We'll be dealing with that. We're dealing with it now in this legislative session. And again, I think the important part is to look at education rather than subsidization. During the special session of 2013, the same-sex marriage, the issue came up about what the DOE was going to require about teaching and curriculums and all that. And the DOE kept saying, oh, no, 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 it has nothing to do with it. And then we found out that there was a program that had been introduced and was very controversial but very little known at the time, called Pono Choices, which had been developed at the University of Hawaii, supposedly to counter teen pregnancy, but got into same-sex lifestyles and sexual things for 11 and 12-year-olds particularly. It's an expensive program. It's $1 million. On the mainland they call it something else, but it's basically the same program. And I know State Representative Bob McDermott and I had tried independently going through the DOE to get copies of the curriculum, which they would not give to us. They wouldn't give it to the parents, they wouldn't give it to the taxpayers, they wouldn't give it to your elected representatives. My point is, well, if it's such a great program, why are they hiding it? Why don't they allow people to scrutinize it? Their answer was, oh, you wouldn't understand it. They're talking down to us, they're talking down to parents. You, however, got copies of some of the materials, right?
Yeah, I did.
So what's your take on it?
Well, when I looked at it, initially it looked pretty good. It had its little 10 modules, and the first thing I looked for was there anything about abstinence? And it's in there, and it has a little module about how to have a healthy relationship. But most of Pono Choices is strictly focused on preventing STDs and HIV. There's so little about ethics, maturity, a person's moral compass. They are strictly looking at it as they're assuming kids will automatically be engaged in premarital
And we're
sex.
talking about 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds, right?
And so when you look and you hook on the links and you go to the videos that are provided, I can't imagine my own 12-year-old watching that. It's inappropriate.
Yeah.
It's much too forward, too graphic, and it made me angry and happy that my kid isn't going to be exposed to that.
You know,
I
it's
will not allow
interesting.
it.
During the debate back in November of last year, when we raised this issue about this particular program and others, the DOE pulled it off the shelf and said they were going to investigate. This was the fastest investigation by a state agency in the history of Hawaii, particularly DOE. I think it lasted 9 days, and then they said, oh yeah, it's fine, it's good, we'll put it back. There was no investigation. They didn't talk to parents, they didn't talk to legislators, they didn't talk to anybody else about it, so it was a sham.
And when you look at who gave input into that, there's no parent.
Right.
There's only agencies like Planned Parenthood and some of these other groups that work with youth.
That's part of their agenda, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think that's a component that might have given them guidance as to what would be appropriate and what parents would think is acceptable for their kids to
see. I have a real problem with this program and others like it. First of all, I don't think it's Pono. and I don't think it's choices. Now, DOE says, oh yeah, the parents can opt out, but most parents that we've talked to or that have come to us for help, they didn't even know about it, or they didn't know what the consequences were. They were told, oh, it's about teen pregnancy, it's about this and that, and it's far more than that. So if we're talking about transparency, then certainly we should be transparent. And if we're talking about taxpayer funds, we certainly should be looking at those programs, and maybe 80%, 90% or more is good and positive. If so, then we should be looking at that and understanding that. I think it's this idea of secrecy, number one, arrogance that the bureaucracy, I'm not talking about the teachers, because I know a lot of the teachers are very concerned who have to teach this curriculum. I'm talking about the bureaucracy. It takes a position, we know more than the parents about your children, and we certainly know more about the public officials. You know, they're just in our way. I think we have to cut away from this. I think we have to hold DOE and others more accountable, particularly when they come to the legislature and they ask for more money. I know I, for one, am going to say no. No curriculum, no money. You're not willing to talk to parents. You're not willing to give them those choices. I think that's only the fair thing to do. Well, look, you've talked so much, Kimberly. We don't have much time left. Are there other issues that you're concerned about or you think the public should know about for this legislative session?
Well, I think just keeping an eye on what's going on in your own children's classroom, the school, being aware of decisions made at the school level that will affect your child, and watching the legislative session to see if funding and things that will affect your child's school come up.
Mm-hmm.
Get involved. You can provide testimony, as you said in the opening, and make a difference in your community.
And just to reiterate, I mean, you're positive for public education. I am as well. I want to see it succeed. I want the best possible people there. I want them to be compensated adequately and all that. But bottom line is, we want the kids educated, not just sexual performance, but reading, writing, mathematics, geography, history, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And if anybody has any questions, they can call you in my Senate office.
That's
You'll
right.
help them, right?
Sure.
Okay, we'll even help them if you have an idea you want to testify or you don't know exactly how to do that. We'll walk them through that process as well.
Absolutely. Sure.
Great. Okay, well, we're looking forward to it. And hopefully we can get some good legislation, and hopefully we can improve the public education that we have. We didn't even get a chance to touch on charter schools, part of the public education system, and there are a lot of other programs, many of which are worthwhile supporting, but maybe we can do that in a future program.
Sure.
So we want to thank you for joining us. We hope this has been of some value and some interest to you. This is Sam Slom saying, have a better day. Aloha.